Great. Well, good afternoon, and quite frankly, thank you for taking the time, everyone, to really just have a conversation over the next hour for what's going on in the state as it relates to fire and resource management. I know I've had an opportunity to interact with many of you over time on a variety of issues, and really wanted to take the time today to talk a little bit about certainly probably what's foremost on everyone's mind is fire season and where we're at. Certainly, looking at the news and the reports going on, we're looking at over 16 active fires burning in the state as we speak. On top of the over 250 to 300 fires that CAL FIRE, our local government partners, and others initial attack and put out before they become big each week. So we really are at the peak of fire season right now. The governor recognized early on, both last year and this year, that after 4 consecutive years of well below normal rainfall and drought, that our vegetation conditions, and you're all living it out there, are just critically dry. We keep track of the moisture in the vegetation, its ability to burn, and the heat it gives off throughout the year, every year, and we are reaching critical levels in many areas of the state in terms of how dry it is and in terms of how hot it has the potential to burn. And that is absolutely proving itself out this year as we've seen this fire here in Lake County, the Rocky Fire and the Jerusalem Fire, as well as fires that are burning throughout Trinity and Shasta and Humboldt counties in the far north of the state. To date, we've had over 4,300 fires in California. That's compared to the 5-year average that is only about 2,800, a little over 2,800. So we are almost 1,500 fires to date ahead of the normal. And since this fire siege began on July 22nd, which really started off with the Rag Fire in Napa County, we have burned over 117,960 acres to date, and that's more than twice the amount of acreage we would normally burn to date. So we're absolutely in it. Fire season is here. We've been talking about this. As I mentioned, Governor Brown provided significant additional augmentation and additional funding to support resources in the state. That included keeping CAL FIRE resources staffed year-round in many parts of the state. It also brought most of our resources on much earlier than normal, probably 6 to 8 weeks on average around the state. And we are prepared to staff right up into Christmas if that's what it takes to combat the conditions that we're seeing. We also put additional firefighters on fire engines around the state, and that's paying off significantly as we put fire engines on these fires initial attack and have additional resource or additional firefighters to contain the fires. And we're certainly in it for the long haul. Again, we're only at the peak. We're only beginning to be at the peak right now. We're in August. We've got certainly the most critical months of the summer yet to go. A number of the challenges we've been facing, in addition to, of course, just the extreme dryness and the rates of spread of these fires, we're also contending with some of the fire starts. You've heard that there have been a number of arrests recently. I believe just in the last several weeks we've had 5 arrests that have involved either individuals intentionally setting fires through arson or just doing things that were criminally negligent that caused them to be arrested. And we're going to continue to have a very aggressive approach to investigating all fires, and we're going to continue to prosecute individuals who willfully start fires to the full extent of the law. Again, we can't afford to have the state's 16 major fires burning, the impacts it places to property, to lives, and quite frankly income, and the variety of other issues, air quality, that it's impacting the state. Something else that's been very significant both last year and even more prominent this year has been hobby drones impacting the fire areas. We've had, I believe, over 8 incidents so far this year, several last year, where the use of these quadcopters or remotely piloted gliders have been operating by civilians in a fire area without any knowledge by the incident until an aircraft, either fixed-wing air tanker or helicopter, is attempting to make a water drop or retardant drop, and they come into close contact with that. What that causes is an immediate grounding of aircraft, or at least they have to move out of the area and suspend firefighting operations until those drones can be removed from the area. And that costs us critical acreage being burned. It costs us critical impact to the ability to protect lives and property, and certainly puts the pilots, the firefighters, and anybody else on the ground at significant risk should there be an accident resulting from a drone collision. And so we are spending a great deal of effort to put the public message out there to warn everybody, please don't use drones, because if you fly, we cannot fly. And that is going to create significant impacts to the incident. And you'll be seeing more. There will be some tip lines out there, so if you see somebody using drones in these areas, absolutely there will be the ability to call, report that, and help us get law enforcement out there quickly. And really want to thank San Bernardino County for really stepping forward. We've had a number of drone or remotely piloted aircraft incidents in that county, and the county really stepped forward with reward monies and very aggressive in the public message, and that's exactly what we need. Fire season is just one piece of the challenges we're obviously facing. Some of the things that lead right up to that is the significant amount of insect and disease mortality caused by drought stress on trees throughout the state, but particularly in the southern Sierra and in many of the mountains of the Central Coast in Southern California. We have over 12 million and growing the number of trees that are dead or dying from insect and disease mortality. This has created a significant standing dead kindling or fuel for the fires that are there. It's also over time going to be a significant challenge environmentally and for the watersheds as we look at conifers and others going out of the system and that being replaced by other species, brush, etc. Significant impact to communities. We have many communities reporting in where even small subdivisions or homeowners associations where there may be 20, 30, or 40 trees in and around homes that require a significant amount of technical work to remove. And certainly the state doesn't have the ability to remove 12 million trees, nor do our federal partners on the National Forest. So we're working very closely on our public message to help landowners understand what resources are available to them for tree removal, even for on the larger scale communities that want to do evacuation planning relative to large scale tree dieback and how that might impact those things. And so again, a public message is out there. All of this, you can go to the CAL FIRE website and get information on the bark beetle and the other insect and disease mortality. We're also looking, what's been high on our radar, of course, both for use on wildland fires, but also for day-to-day project work, and that's our conservation camp, our fire crews. We know over time, due to various legislation and other needs within the state system, the very same inmates that are utilized in our conservation camp program are also the same inmate that are needed at the local level, that are also those that are paroling out much earlier due to various realignment legislation and other factors. And so this is something we've been watching very closely to maintain our camp population. We have 196 fire crews staffed around the state. Almost 4,300 inmates make up that program. It's a critical resource in the firefight going on right now. We probably have right now over 3/4 of those crews committed to fires in the state, and those that aren't on fires are critical for initial attacking the new fires that start so they don't become big. And that really, they are the ones that put the hand line in, they haul equipment in, they hike back into miles into the fire line to do that backbreaking work, and without them we would not be successful in the firefight. And they also are doing the project work every day. Whether it's grant funds assisting fire safe councils or day-to-day work through our prescribed fire or vegetation management program, those fire crews are the ones that are out there along with our partners at the Conservation Corps and others, doing that day-to-day work every day. We appreciate the partnerships with the counties where we've been able to have contracts back with the Department of Corrections to provide those inmates back into the system. That has been very helpful. And we're also looking over time, furthering partnership with the California Conservation Corps. We've just recently, through the governor's budget, working through a process with the CCC to reopen the Butte Fire Center in Magalia, which will provide us up to another 4 hand crews in Butte County, which currently does not exist. We're looking for other areas in the state where we may be able to partner through the CCC or maybe some other innovative programs that we can look at in the future, as we, again, want to maintain our existing capacity, but we also need to look to the future, because there's really a need for more of these crews around the state to do the work that we do in and around all the communities that you're located at. Another funding source, or another big effort that the state's working on, has to do with cap and trade and greenhouse gas emissions. Last year, CAL FIRE received $42 million in greenhouse gas funding to do project work, and we're currently in the process of rolling out another set of grants through that program. Last month, we awarded close to, I believe, $18 million in grant funding for urban and community forestry. And then we also awarded several $1 millions for conservation easements to ensure that we maintain working forests from converting to other non-forest and non-compatible uses. We're going to continue to work in these project areas as we identify how to sequester carbon and provide additional treatments to the forest landscape, so healthier forests, less fire risk, and hopefully even assist locally with economies as we work on bioenergy, biomass, in this entire effort to treat fuels and protect the forest. So there will be more of that coming out here in the coming weeks as we identify projects around the state. And these really are going to be landscape level projects, not necessarily individual landowner projects, but projects like we're doing and rolling out along Highway 50 called Fire Adapted 50, collaborating with Forest Service, County of El Dorado, Resource Conservation District there, Caltrans, timber industry, and many others to take advantage of work that we were already doing in a collaborative way, and then build on lessons learned and fuels that were treated as part of the King Fire from last year, and really demonstrate how we can take one landscape and work on it collectively to get the biggest bang for the buck. So across the board, there's just a great deal of effort going into, one, trying to address the long-term issues in the state, looking 20, 30 years down the road to really work on forest landscape, forest health management, both on helping private landowners in the forest land, but also working with our federal partners to bring their resources to bear and work on those projects that are on federal land as well, because I think we all know that collectively that's what we need to do to address the problem, not on any one particular landscape. And then continue to address the fire challenges that the state faces. The governor has been very clear. He stated as late as last Thursday publicly that he will bring whatever resources to bear that the state needs to combat this challenge. And so we continue to, again, have the commitment of resources and everything that it takes, but the commitment of our local partners, all of you in this firefight every day, is critical, and we absolutely depend on our relationship through the mutual aid system and the day-to-day relationship in that initial attack of putting fires out together, regardless of the patch we wear on our shoulder, because we do it together for the betterment of the folks that live here in the state and the resources that we protect. So with that, I'd really like to open it up and spend more time with some questions and really see what you're interested in talking about.
Thank you, Chief. We have a question. We had a question about the dead trees, and you talked about it for a minute. Do you mind expanding on what the state is doing to address the millions of dead trees?
Absolutely. So we've entered into a public education campaign. You can go to a website, www.prepareforbarkbeetle.org, and I will make sure that all that information is here at the CSAC office so that you can all access that. But it's going to be looking at things what are the signs of bark beetle infestation? How can property owners address dead tree removal? In many cases, homes are built right around trees. They're actually built into the structure, and when that tree dies, it can be very expensive, $30,000, $40,000 to have a tree removed. So we want to be able to provide the technical references so that property owners and landowners can access who might be able to address helping them with that tree removal. And talking a lot about just the bark beetle itself. Sometimes when we've identified and the tree starts to die, it's really too late. So what are some of the things that a property owner can do to help mitigate and protect their trees from bark beetle and disease attack. And again, just what assistance is out there. There are cost share programs, there are other assistance, certainly through CAL FIRE and other federal programs that can help with tree thinning, pruning, and even tree planting after a fire or after an insect outbreak. So all that information can be contained through the prepareforbarkbeetle.org website.
You talked a bit about the drones and the problems that that has caused in the firefighting efforts. Has the publicity around the issue and the steps that your department has undertaken and that a couple of counties have undertaken, has that had any effect yet that you can tell on the number of drone incidents that there have been?
So we obviously it's hard to tell if we've avoided an incident if someone mitigated and just didn't do it. But we have noticed that there, for a bit there was a decline in the number that were occurring at incidents. But it's still a significant issue. Just as late as just a few days ago, one of our air tankers identified a drone at about 3,000 feet as the aircraft was exiting the Jerusalem fire there. And so there's still, and again, the aircraft had to take evasive action to avoid contact. So it's still alive and well. It's still an issue. However, we are seeing a greater public consciousness. We see it on the social media. We see comments on Facebook that folks are absolutely, there's been, to be honest with you, we appreciate where the public is at in their consciousness of this, because there was very much a zero tolerance attitude in the feedback we're getting from the public.
Change the subject a little bit here. There's a question about using enviroscreen to determine disadvantaged communities for allocating urban forestry funds under cap and trade. Is that something that CAL FIRE is going to continue to do?
CAL FIRE is going to continue to work with the Air Resources Board and the administration on whatever the appropriate process for disseminating and allocating the cap and trade dollars. EnviroScreen has been the process up until now and continues to be. However, we are also in the allocation of the recent greenhouse gas funding. The proposal is to utilize, to make it a mix, that only maybe a portion of the money goes to using EnviroScreen, and then we look at other communities around the state. It's a process that we continue to work with the administration and refine. I think everybody agrees that we want to get all of these funds out to the highest priority areas, ensure we're assisting disadvantaged communities, but at the same time ensure we're getting the funding out to communities that really need the work done to protect the environment and to protect those communities regardless of their status economically.
What about water supplies? Has there been, I assume that's been a challenge because there's less water for all purposes. Has that been a challenge for the department?
Obviously, this is something we've been paying very close attention to, particularly just going from last year to this year, where we have noticed in the rural areas a significant decrease in the amount of water supply available through agricultural ponds, natural rivers, etc., and lakes. So it's something that we look at. We order additional resources. We can bring in additional water tenders. We can order additional fire engines. We can order additional aircraft if we have to shuttle water further. We are even working with using what we call portable water storage devices. They're just either blow-up tanks or other devices that we can pre-stage out in areas so that it provides a water source for helicopters or fire engines to draw from should they need that. We've been fortunate in many of the fires that are occurring here recently that they're close to large water bodies, Lake Berryessa, Clear Lake, and so that has been helpful, and water supplies have been less of an issue. But many of the areas in the southern Sierra, other counties in the southern half of the state aren't as fortunate, and so we have pre-identified areas where we know we're going to have to make alternative means to get water there.
Just a couple more questions here. are there, when you mentioned the landscape level projects, in terms of getting the money from the cap and trade funds, what are the, as we go into the future, can you talk a little bit more about the types of projects that the department will be selecting, and where they'll be, and what sort of projects they are, and where they'll be, and how those decisions will be made?
Absolutely. So as we work towards implementing the provisions of Assembly Bill 32, the greenhouse gas emission requirements passed almost 10 years ago now, carbon sequestration and GHG emission are a big piece and sort of an underlying theme of where we're trying to go with many of our projects. Certainly the cap and trade dollars, that's a requirement to ensure we're able to successfully sequester carbon. What we are really identifying that in the forest sector, in our forest lands, not only can we reduce carbon emissions, we can actually sequester more. We can actually take that and rather than just reducing, we can actually increase the storage capacity. And that means through, we will be looking at projects that are very solid in terms of forest management. We're going to go initially thin, prune forest stands, reduce fuel loading. It may involve fuel breaks. The whole idea, the priority goes to projects that have the greater good for a watershed, for a community, less individual landowner specific kind of a project, and more projects that focus on a broader number of landowners, a bigger collaboration of multiple participants and multiple stakeholders, and involve biomass. We want to make sure that economically we have a way to pay that material we're cutting, pay its way out of the woods, if you will. And that's the biggest challenge here, is we can continue to put public funding at all of these projects, and we will never have enough money to accomplish what needs to get done out there. It has to be hit from multiple areas. There has to be an economic incentive to get this work done so that landowners will have the ability, when they go to thin and prune and cut vegetation, that they can haul it out off their property and they can take it somewhere where they're getting some compensation for that material, so it helps pay the cost of removing it. The days of cutting and piling and burning across the landscape is just not there. We are really pushing prescribed fire. I think prescribed fire is one of the most valuable tools in our toolbox for reducing fuel loading, but it's just one tool in that toolbox. We have to be cognizant of impact to air quality and emission standards, and so anything that we can do to manage the vegetation in other ways, through again biomass, through other opportunities, we're going to certainly promote. And we are looking at opportunities around the state where biomass facilities would be very beneficial. It's just a matter of, can we find the utilities to purchase the electricity and find that economic sweet spot, if you will, to make it conducive for everybody.
And kind of a related question, are you in a position where you can talk a little bit about your discussions with the federal government, specifically about fuels management on federal lands?
Absolutely. We know there are 18 national forests in the state, and there are obviously numerous national parks, Bureau of Land Management. We have a very close relationship with our partners at the federal level. Again, a third of the landscape is within federal ownership, and a third of the state's landscape are the 31 million acres of private wildland that CAL FIRE and our other partners we work to protect. It's all intermixed, much of it is intermixed, so we can't work on private land without having our partners from the federal agencies at the table, and vice versa. The federal land ownerships are intermixed with private land, and as they implement forest management plans, fire plans, and other planning efforts, the state and our local partners have to be at the table to ensure that the plans meet everybody's objectives. These large landscape level projects have to involve the state, local government, and our federal partners, or they're not going to be successful. The challenge is obviously working through in federal environmental challenges, federal policy that again, is hard sometimes to implement at the local level because of specific issues or greater regulatory concerns and public policy. So we are very much at the table, particularly with Region 5 of the Forest Service, to look at some paths forward on these landscape level projects that will help streamline environmental review and address funding for projects across ownership boundaries. And that's what we're looking very closely at with cap and trade. Do we have the ability to share some of that funding across boundaries on federal land if that helps benefit the greater good for all of the ownerships within the project area? So we're really breaking some good ground here as we go forward and invest, particularly with greenhouse gas monies and other funding sources across the landscape. Something that's a bit tied to this but important to talk about, and literally had a discussion about an hour and a half ago with a number of the congressional representatives representing a number of states, including California. It has to do with this fire borrowing, and which we're living literally right now as we have fires burning not only in California, but we're starting to get additional fires in the Pacific Northwest. And that's the Forest Service exceeding or reaching its fire protection program budget. And historically, when they reach the limit of their budget, they have to start borrowing funding from other program areas within the National Forest System. And that means the critical fuels treatment and fire prevention program money that they allocate, that gets borrowed to keep fire engines and firefighters on the fire lines. It literally impacts the National Forest recreation programs and the other things that they do. While we can never stop putting money into fire protection because that response is critical, if we continue to borrow money from these other program areas, we will never get ahead of this fire problem. Because if we don't treat the fuels, if we aren't doing preventative measures and fuel treatment work, the fire problem is just going to continue to grow in California and throughout the West. So the state has been, California has been very supportive of various pieces of legislation, not only from Congress, but from the administration from Washington, relative to mechanisms to provide additional emergency funding to the Forest Service in times of need. Very similar to what California utilizes in its emergency fund. Because when the fire is burning, it is not the time to decide how things are funded. It's the time to do what our governor is doing and ensure that we have everything that we need and not impact other program areas. And so we continue to monitor that and support that from California, and we'll just see where things go back in DC.
And then one last question, unless we get a question in, unless somebody attending the webinar types a question in while you're answering this. We hear a lot from our counties about forest management, and whether it's related to fires or recreation or roads through forest land. And one of the things that they talk about a lot when they get together is their relationship with the federal forest manager. And some of them have very good relationships. Some of them struggle to see eye to eye. Do you have any advice on what counties can do in these conversations?
The first piece is don't ever give up, and you used the word, it's relationships. And I think 99% of what we all do is about relationships, and it's certainly personality driven. We all have different policies, different mandates depending on our organizations, and that's certainly true with the National Forest and the National Forest System. But all issues are local, and even though a national forest these are administered as a national program, they are still making up lands in your counties and affect watersheds and communities in your counties. And so you have to continue to be a strong, active, aggressive voice at the table, and it's collective as well as individual. I think through CSAC, through other organizations, you have to continue to push that voice, and not just with the federal system, but certainly working with the state collectively. I can tell you from CAL FIRE's perspective, we listen to the concerns. It doesn't always mean we can find a path forward, but we're at the end of the day, the state is made up of counties, and so collectively we're all here supporting what you're all doing out on the ground, and it's just how we get there. So again, my biggest advice and recommendation is stay engaged, be the squeaky wheel, but don't walk away from the table. And it does mean sometimes you need to go to Washington, or you need to come here to Sacramento, but don't give up. Don't become frustrated. We will get through the various challenges we face. Many things have happened because you all have stayed engaged, and it really starts out there with you, getting to know your forest supervisor, engaging with the fire staff, the district rangers, whomever is interacting, and we can certainly help CAL FIRE folks and engage in that where needed, but stay engaged across the board.
And I guess lastly, do you have any other advice for counties about what they can either do to help your efforts or do to be effective in any of the areas that you talked about today?
It's staying engaged with CAL FIRE has 21 units around the state that make up our organization that administer our programs in our department. So it's continuing to stay engaged at that level with our unit chiefs and our local staff. Bring issues forward to them early and have that dialogue. Stay engaged, obviously, with CSAC and others, because we do talk about issues of mutual benefit across the state that we can work on collectively. And of course, there's always that balance of where the administration is at on a particular issue and where you all may be at. But it doesn't mean that we aren't having dialogue at the state level about how to work through those challenges. And many times we can be on the absolute same side of the issue and really do that together. It's also engaging your communications office programs. Our communications program has a great deal of information that they're putting out via websites, but they also have staff out there located kind of regionally around the state. And so really we can be an extension of your issues, and you can certainly help us be an extension of the issues we're trying to address for the collective good of the state. And these things can be tailored not just as the state message, but really worked regionally or locally to meet your needs and take care of what you need to get done.
We got some more questions, as anticipated.
Was something I said?
You talked in response to an earlier question about water levels and how it's affecting firefighting, and that been fortunate that some of the major fires have been near existing water sources. Are there if there are the lower levels of water in lakes and reservoirs affecting the ability to fight fires, or does it depend on where the fires are?
Water availability really does depend on where the fire is located. Generally speaking, we are able to find dip sites for helicopters. If we can't, then yes, we're just going to fly further to go find that source. And yes, it can impact, because that means a longer travel time for the helicopter or other resources to go to the water supply and come back. I think of even greater concern for us is that we're not impacting a domestic water supply where we physically hook up to a fire hydrant, because there are many communities, as you know, around the state that have very limited water systems. And while public safety, firefighting water is certainly a priority, we also recognize that we could very quickly drain a small system. And how do we get that replaced? Or we could really put a community in additional peril if we've reduced domestic water supply. So we are working really hard around the state to make sure that our local unit staff know where those critical water supplies are, and that they can mitigate that right up front about bringing in additional water trucks or doing what they need to do. The other issue for us is making sure if we drain an agricultural pond, recognizing that's the only water available for livestock or agricultural plants, how are we going to get that replaced? And historically, we can compensate a landowner for the value of the water, and then you can go purchase it from a purveyor. Well, now it's not about the money, it's about the physical water. Where are we going to get the water, or where's the landowner going to get the water to replace it? So those are the other things we're looking at very closely. If we're going to impact a landowner, we want to make sure that we have the ability to provide some compensation or to adjudicate the issue.
Thank you. I would have been surprised if we had gotten out of here without a question about the SRA fees.
Me too.
So the question came in asking how SRA fees are being used, and if you're in a position to say so, why are commercial properties not paying the assessments?
So the first question is, and we have a recent document that was posted on August 5th, and it's the informational report for state responsibility area fire prevention fee. And it's a comprehensive document that walks through over the last several years where the fire prevention fund has been allocated, what's been collected and how we've spent that across the board. And certainly a portion of that goes to administering the program, both through CAL FIRE and the Board of Equalization. And but the rest, it's our commitment to get this money out on the ground to do real work. Between last year and this year, $15 million has been allocated in grant funding to go out to fire districts, fire safe councils, and other funding sources or other nonprofits, other groups that qualify to do work on the ground. We are also using the money internally to help bolster our vegetation management program and do more projects through our hand crews, our fire engines going out during the winter months and appropriate months to help do more burning. Defensible space inspections. We have added additional defensible space inspectors during the key months of the year around the state, so we can really work with property owners on education about what defensible space is and what it takes to help protect your home. And we have increased significantly the number of inspections. We had 200,000 defensible space inspections so far this year. The document is available through the Board of Forestry's website. It's available through CAL FIRE's website. I would encourage everybody to look at that. We are working really hard about getting this money back out to where the fee payers are paying it. And there's some charts and graphs in that document that talk about proportionally where it's being spent versus where it's being collected. And our goal is to ensure to get it back out there over time in the most proportional method possible. Who the fee is being collected from is legislatively or driven by the original act. It basically covers over 750,000 property owners where there's habitable structure on that property.
We have a question here. Is there a pursuit to modify FMAG requirements for areas with multiple fires, such as Trinity? The asker knows that the feds look at one fire individually. Will they look at the incident collectively to assist with reimbursement for law enforcement resources who come to help on security patrol and things like that?
Very good question. And obviously we work very closely with the California Office of Emergency Services, who really champions on behalf of the state and all of you, really all of us, in terms of what fires are eligible. And so when we think we have a fire that's eligible for FMAG, we provide that information real time to the Office of Emergency Services. They then work with federal partners and others to get it validated and bring forward a proposal each time, or a request to FEMA here in California, which is then telegraphed to Washington. Sometimes those can look where there's a collective issue. Trinity County is a perfect example where we have multiple fires impacting the same communities. I can think of High Palm and Hayfork and several others right now that have multiple fires on multiple sides. Some of the challenges that we have on these fires is they're federal fires that aren't eligible for FMAG, and so we work through that to determine are there pieces of these fires. For example, the Forks fire is in Unified Command, and so there are pieces of that fire that are within state and local government responsibility. And so when we get to those triggers, we absolutely bring that forward with Cal OES to determine how we could get that through for an FMAG. Sometimes it could even elevate to a presidential declaration, which would make things even easier to roll the entire county up. really Cal OES is the expert at running that forward. We take their lead, but we absolutely are going to continue to put forward any of the fires that we think are eligible forward to ensure we can try to get that recovery. And we absolutely recognize the commitment that law enforcement, in addition to every other local government agency, I can tell you from having been out to the Rocky Fire, whether it's county public works, animal control, everyone is pitching in on these fires and are part of the equation. And these aren't part of your regularly scheduled budgets, if you will. So it's imperative that we can try to collect up and identify costs to try to get you, reimbursement where we can.
Just have one time for one final question. Ask, what about legislation that would allow CAL FIRE to manage fires instead of just suppressing them, similar to the way the Park Service does with national parks? And the person asking the question goes on to note that you'd need the property owner's permission, but it seems like it would be better to manage fires instead of suppressing them.
It's actually a very good question, and something that's very real time in discussions we're having right now here in California. The challenge with the private lands in the state, and that's what CAL FIRE protects, 95 or 99% of the land that CAL FIRE protects, 31 million acres, it's private land, and that's anywhere from a quarter-acre size property up to hundreds of thousand acres of timberland and some of the largest ownerships, and all sizes in between. Challenge we have is fires know no boundaries, and so that quarter-acre landowner may absolutely want to have managed fire on their property. There is absolutely no way to keep that fire on their property, and the people next door to them may want no part of that, or it may not fit into the appropriate management objectives for their land. So we aren't like the national forest land where there's hundreds of thousands of acres in one plan under one ownership. We have to respect the individual values of each property, and so that makes it very difficult when a fire escapes from one property to the next to control that. So we are continuing to be very aggressive in our firefight. However, we recognize the trade-off of that is that we have fuels that are building up. We don't have the ability to use natural fire to reduce that fuel loading, and so we're doing some very groundbreaking efforts right now with a number of our partners, the Forest Service, the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, many other groups that we're signing a memorandum of understanding that will allow us to partner more on use of fire. And so to the extent that each of these agencies brings its policies and requirements forward, we are really going to push collectively for the use of prescribed fire wherever possible. We are going to work so we can mitigate. Much better to have prescribed fire with reduced emissions and smoke in the air on our terms versus these conflagrations that we're having right now as we speak here in Lake and Napa and other counties, where we're putting health at risk of individuals, and we're just denuding the landscape with high intensity fires. And so groundbreaking efforts to be entering into a collaborative MOU with our many partners, both non-governmental and others, to take this ball forward.
Thank you, Chief Pimlott. That's all the time we have for today. Appreciate you answering all those questions.